April 2023, Charleston. The Magnolia Court shimmered with marble floors and champagne chatter, the kind of place where everyone measured worth by fabric and last names. I stood by the entrance in a simple $30 gray suit I'd bought off a clearance rack downtown. It fit well enough. Not perfect, but dignified. The problem wasn't the suit, it was the people staring at it. My sister Valerie spotted me first. Her gown was silver silk tailored within an inch of pride. Walmart chic, she said loudly enough for 3 tables to hear. Laughter rippled like perfume in the air. I smiled, adjusted the cuff, and whispered to myself, "Let them laugh." But inside, I felt the heat crawl up my neck. Valerie had always known where to press. She was the golden one, the one who inherited charm and credit lines in equal measure. I was the quiet one. The practical one, the one who left our family business before it collapsed under its own ego. She had called me Bargain Bin Diana once. I told her bargains build empires. She laughed then too. Tonight she had an audience. I walked past her head high into a swirl of champagne glass reflections and the low hum of a string quartet. The valet who'd taken my car earlier hurried after me, holding up a small black card. "Ms. Mercer owner's priority," he said. "You left your parking slip." Valerie froze mid-sip. For a second, confusion clouded her perfect smile. "Owner," she muttered. The valet bowed slightly. "Welcome back, Ms. Mercer." Then he left. Her friends exchanged looks. Valerie shrugged it off. "Must be another Mercer," she said, but her laugh sounded thinner now. I didn't explain, I just smiled. The quiet kind of smile that hides history, the kind that says more than words. I found a corner seat near the bar away from the noise. The bartender, a young man with nervous eyes, was trying to process a payment. Valerie's platinum card blinked red on the screen. "It says, 'Temporary hold,'" he murmured. Her face stiffened. "Try again." He did. Same result. "There must be a mistake," she hissed, then turned on him, voice sharp. "Do you even know how to handle a premium account? People were watching now." The bartender's hands trembled. I reached into my bag, pulled out a 20 and slid it across the counter. "He's fine," I said softly. "Here, this covers it." The bartender looked at me in gratitude. Valerie blinked, stunned. "You didn't have to, I know," I said. But it felt right. A strange silence fell between us. For once, she didn't have a comeback. A moment later, Evelyn, the event planner, hurried past holding a tablet. She stopped just long enough to nod at me. "Thank you for the timely escrow confirmation, Ms. Mercer," she said. Then she was gone again, back into the chaos of catering and crystal. Valerie tilted her head, frowning. "Escrow confirmation," she repeated. "What was that about?" I shrugged. Maybe she meant someone else. She let out a short laugh that didn't reach her eyes. My heart pounded, not from fear, but from restraint. For months, I had stayed invisible by choice. Tonight, that invisibility was cracking one coincidence at a time. I could have told her everything right then that the event she was bragging about had been saved because I quietly wired the missing $90,000 to the venue under my company's name, Mercer Interiors. But I didn't. Not yet. I wanted her to see me without being told who I was. I wanted her to recognize dignity without a label. The irony wasn't lost on me. A woman mocked for her $30 suit was the same woman keeping the lights on in this ballroom. The chandelier above glimmered, catching in the rim of my glass. I lifted it just a sip to steady myself. Around me, the guests sparkled in sequins and entitlement. Conversations flowed about stocks estates, destination honeymoons. It was a world obsessed with price tags and validation. I had lived in that world once and escaped with my sanity barely intact. Now I watched from the margins, knowing that power doesn't always shout it. Sometimes signs quiet wires. A small boy ran by, nearly knocking into my chair, chased by a laughing bridesmaid. For a second, I envied their simplicity. Then I looked back at Valerie, surrounded by her circle of admirers, pretending not to glance my way. She didn't know that tomorrow's invoice would bear my signature. She didn't know the event planner had copied me on every message. She didn't know that her laughter tonight would echo differently when truth arrived. She only saw a woman in a cheap suit standing alone. I saw something else entirely. I saw a line being drawn, subtle but irreversible, between vanity and value. As the orchestra began its next piece, I placed my glass down carefully and took a slow breath. My mother used to say, "You can't buy grace, only practice it." I smiled faintly. Maybe that was why I still tipped $20 on a $5 soda. Maybe that was why, despite everything, I still showed up. They measured me by a $30 suit. They forgot who signs the bills. Charleston has a way of holding memory like salt in the air. Every street feels like something you left behind. When I drive past Broad Street, I can still see the faded sign of Mercer Home and Design, the family store that once carried our name with pride. My mother filled the place with warmth and color. My father filled it with rules. He believed in straight lines and quiet children. He used to say that dignity came from discipline, but I think he meant obedience. Valerie learned that lesson well. She smiled the way he wanted, spoke when spoken to, and became the reflection of everything he wanted the world to see. She was the favorite. I was the project that never measured up. I was the one who spent more time behind the counter than in front of customers, the one who rearranged the displays to make the room breathe better. I loved textures, not titles. Even then, I understood space the way other people understood speech. But it never impressed him. After his passing, Valerie inherited most of the store's assets. I inherited his silence. That was fine with me. The silence gave me space to think. I started Mercer Interiors from a rented garage with a folding table, a used drafting lamp, and an idea that beauty did not have to shout. For a while, it was enough. Then Robert came along. He was charming in that calculated way people learn from watching others. He admired my independence until he realized it could not be owned. Slowly, admiration turned into correction. He began to manage our money. He called it partnership. I called it erasure. Every time I brought home a new client, he found a way to spend the commission before it arrived. When I questioned him, he smiled and said, "You're too generous, Diana. Let me handle it." The generosity he spoke of was my income. By 2018, there was little left to handle. I remember the night we ended it. The house felt heavy with unspoken debts. Robert sat at the table reading an email, his expression smug. I had just discovered he had taken out a small business loan in my name. My name. It was a quiet kind of betrayal that cuts deeper than shouting ever could. I packed 2 suitcases, withdrew the last $18 on $600 left in our joint account, and walked away. I left behind the furniture, the car, the mortgage, the promises. I kept my name. That was the only thing that still belonged to me. Starting over at 50 was not glamorous. It was receipts, grocery lists, and worry. It was learning that freedom sometimes looks like a 1-bedroom apartment with secondhand curtains and peace you can finally afford. I took a part-time consulting job, then another, until Mercer Interiors began to breathe again. At night, I taught myself new design software sketching while the city slept. I learned to live small but live clean. No waste, no pretense, no one to impress. One evening in 2020, the phone rang. It was Mrs. Caldwell, a resort owner from Kiowa Island who had worked with me years ago. Her voice was soft but sure. "Diana, I heard you're back on your feet. I've been waiting for you to reopen your studio. I'm putting you on retainer, $25,000 for the season. I trust your eye." I nearly dropped the phone. For a moment, I could not breathe. It wasn't just the money. It was validation. Proof that quiet work had been noticed after all. That retainer saved my business. It was the first step toward rebuilding Mercer Interiors into something sustainable and truly mine. I paid my overdue taxes, replaced my worn laptop, and bought a secondhand sewing machine that cost $19 a month on credit. Every time I made a payment, I felt a strange sense of pride. There is dignity in paying your own way, even in small amounts. I started keeping a small notebook of every expense: groceries, utilities, client lunches. At the end of each month, I would sit by the window and add the numbers. I liked seeing them balance. It reminded me that I was no longer a line item in someone else's ledger. Charleston moved around me as if nothing had changed, yet everything had. The same couples still strolled the waterfront. The same families still filled the Sunday markets. But I walked lighter. I no longer looked over my shoulder for approval that would never come. Sometimes I ran into Valerie at local events. She would talk about her projects and committees with the casual air of someone rehearsing status. She often asked if I had found a real office yet. I told her my office had a better view than hers, sunlight and quiet. She thought I was joking. I wasn't. By 2022, Mercer Interiors was solvent again. My client list had doubled and I had learned to say no when the job did not feel right. I no longer chased reputation. I chased peace. I realized then that the hardest part of starting over isn't money, it's silence. The kind of silence that sits across the dinner table after years of being talked over. The kind that follows you into empty rooms until you learn to fill it with your own voice. Some nights, I would walk along the Battery and think about my mother, how she used to hum while reupholstering chairs. She taught me that everything can be restored if you care enough to sand the edges and start again. Maybe that was why I kept the name Mercer. Not for my father, not for Valerie, but for her. Dignity, she said once, is not what others give you. It's what you refuse to sell. I understood that now. Life was simple again. Measured not in what I had lost, but in what I had reclaimed. When the invitation to Emily's wedding arrived months later, the envelope glittered like a dare. I stared at it for a long time, remembering the store, the garage, the retainer, the long climb back. The woman they once pitied was solvent, free, and certain. They just didn't know it yet. The envelope arrived on a Wednesday afternoon, thick with embossed edges and pretense. My name sat alone on the front, written in Valerie's handwriting, clean, expensive, cold. Inside was a gold-trimmed invitation to Emily's wedding, her daughter, my niece. The words were polite, the tone wasn't. The family invites you to celebrate this union. No mention of my name anywhere else. Not Aunt Diana, not Mercer Interiors. Just a formality and obligation mailed out of tradition. I ran my finger over the paper and smiled faintly. It was a perfect reflection of my sister, beautiful, flawless, and empty. For a while, I considered ignoring it, but then something in me shifted. I had spent years hiding in plain sight, working quietly while they paraded wealth they did not earn. Maybe showing up was its own statement. I would go, but on my terms. I opened my small closet and stared at the suits hanging neatly in a row. The charcoal one caught my eye, $30 off the rack, hemmed by a dry cleaner 2 streets over. I had worn it once for a client meeting that changed my life. It wasn't glamorous, but it told the truth. Dignity over money. That would be my uniform. That week, I took it to a tailor for minor adjustments. The woman squinted as she pinned the cuffs. "You want me to add shoulder pads? It'll make it look more expensive," she suggested. I shook my head. No, it should look exactly what it is. Simple. She frowned slightly, but nodded. When I came to pick it up, she smiled. "It fits like confidence," she said. I laughed. Maybe that was enough. A few days later, my email chimed. It was from Evelyn, the event planner for the wedding. We had crossed paths on several Charleston events, though she didn't know how closely our worlds were about to connect. The subject line read, "Balance due Magnolia Court." My eyes moved over the numbers. Total 89, 742 USD. Status paid. Paid by Mercer Interiors, LLC. For a second, I thought it was an error. Then I realized Evelyn had copied me as a courtesy because the transaction came from my company account. I had authorized that transfer weeks ago after an anxious call from her, saying the payment was delayed and the venue was threatening to cancel. Valerie had promised to handle it, but hadn't. I had wired the funds quietly, using the remaining project surplus from my Kiowa contract. It wasn't charity. It was damage control. The event was high profile, and failure would hurt everyone's reputation, including mine by association. Still seeing it written that way, paid felt strange. No one in the family knew. They assumed Valerie's endless credit line covered everything. It was easier that way. I closed the email and deleted it. Some secrets are worth keeping until the right moment. That night, I sat at my kitchen table sipping tea and doing the math. 89,742. It wasn't small. It was nearly what I'd earned in a year when rebuilding the business. But something about it felt poetic. They had laughed when I left. Now they would dance in a room paid for by the woman they mocked. I did not feel pride, exactly, more a quiet satisfaction. The universe keeps its own ledger. Valerie once told me that appearances were investments. Maybe this was mine. 2 days before the wedding, Evelyn called. "Diana, quick question," she said. "We're short a shuttle bus for elderly guests. The budget's maxed out. Do you want me to cancel it?" "No," I said instantly. "Keep it. Bill it to the same account." "You're sure?" "Yes." "They shouldn't have to walk in heels to the parking lot." She laughed softly. "You're one of the few clients who thinks about that." "I'm not a client," I said quietly. "I'm family." After the call, I looked at the itinerary Evelyn had sent. It listed valet staff, caterers, and shuttle schedules. Valerie's name appeared under host family. Mine didn't appear at all. I closed the file and smiled. Some kinds of invisibility are strategic. Friday morning came bright and humid. I took the bus downtown instead of driving carrying my suit jacket in a garment bag. On the ride, an older woman sat next to me holding flowers. "Big day," she asked. "Family wedding," I replied. "That explains the outfit." "Looks elegant?" I glanced down. $30 elegant, I said. She chuckled. "Honey class doesn't come with a receipt." I liked that. It stayed with me. When I arrived at the venue, the first thing I saw was the valet stand lined with luxury cars, BMWs, Jaguars, even a white Tesla with a bow. My rideshare driver hesitated. "You sure this is the right place?" "Yes," I said. "They just don't know that yet." I handed him a tip and walked toward the entrance. Inside, the air was chilled and heavy with white lilies. I recognized Evelyn by her clipboard. She was surrounded by staff directing deliveries. "You made it," she said when she spotted me. "Everything's under control thanks to you. Seriously, if you hadn't sent that transfer, I'd still be begging for extensions." "You're welcome," I said simply. Valerie was across the room talking to a florist, her tone impatient. "The roses look wilted," she complained. Evelyn glanced her way, then back at me. "She has no idea, does she?" I smiled. "None." "You're a better person than me," she said. I'd tell her. "I will," I said, "just not yet." I spent the rest of the afternoon watching the room come together. Staff moved like clockwork, lighting candles, polishing glassware setting centerpieces that cost more than my monthly rent. Everything gleamed, and yet beneath the shimmer, I could feel a quiet irony humming. Every plate, every chair, every perfectly aligned napkin was a receipt with my name on it. That evening, while reviewing last-minute details, Evelyn leaned toward me. "One last thing about the shuttle for the seniors," she said. "You wanted it complimentary, right?" "Yes," I said. "Consider it my gift." She nodded. "You're setting a bar no one else even sees." I laughed softly. "That's the point." When I finally returned home that night, I hung my suit near the window and sat down at my desk. The city was quiet. I thought about what tomorrow would bring: the laughter, the small cruelties, the show. I thought about the irony of paying for a celebration that would exclude me. But I also thought about Emily, about the kindness she once showed as a child when no one else noticed. Maybe this was for her. I poured myself a glass of water, looked at my reflection in the dark window, and whispered, "Some debts are best repaid in silence." Then I turned off the light. Morning light poured through the stained glass windows of Magnolia Court, scattering colors across the marble floor. Guests floated in like perfume pearls, pressed linen laughter rehearsed for the camera. I arrived early, hoping to fade into the edges. The photographer was already directing people into groups. "Family on the left bridal party center," he called. Valerie waved him closer. "Just immediate family, please," she said. Her tone left no room for question. I hesitated near the archway, clutching my small clutch bag. The photographer looked at me, unsure. Valerie didn't turn. She angled her body just enough so that I was cropped out naturally, as if she had done it 1,000 times. It was choreography disguised as coincidence. I stepped back, pretending to adjust my sleeve. My suit caught the morning light, simple and unadorned. I stood beside a small group of children waiting for their turn. One little girl stared at me curiously and asked, in the unfiltered honesty of childhood, "Ma'am, can you wash that $30 outfit in a machine?" Her mother's hand flew to her mouth. The group erupted in laughter, a ripple of polished amusement that stung sharper than intended. I smiled. "Yes," I said softly, "and it doesn't come with a dry cleaning fee." The laughter broke, replaced by a surprised hush. The girl giggled again, oblivious to the tension she had sliced through. I crouched down to her level. "Never apologize for asking," I said. "Questions build empires." She beamed, and I stood again, smoothing my sleeve. The photographer cleared his throat. "Let's keep going," he said. I moved to the side of the hall where the chandeliers hung low, glittering with a kind of arrogance only money can buy. One bulb flickered, then another. The room dimmed unevenly, and the photographer cursed under his breath. Light sensors off. The exposures shot. I glanced up. "The dimmer's probably overloading," I murmured. He blinked at me. "You know lighting enough to keep people from squinting," I said. I walked toward the wall panel, turned the dial carefully until the light evened out. The cameras adjusted. The guests sighed in relief. "Perfect," the photographer whispered. "Thank you. Are you with staff?" "Something like that," I said, stepping back. He grinned already, snapping again. Around me, people posed and preened, unaware that the woman in the $30 suit had just saved their perfect shot. The irony made me smile. As the formal portraits continued, I stood near the refreshment table and watched the planner's assistant checking off invoices. She was muttering totals under her breath. Floral installation $7,800, band $12,000, cake $2,400, venue $55,000, tips $5,000, contingency $8,000. She flipped the page and exhaled. Grand total $89,742. The same number, my number. She caught me watching and smiled nervously. "Just double-checking the math," she said. "It's a beautiful event," I replied. She nodded. "Everything came through last minute. Honestly, I don't know how they managed the payment." I didn't answer. Let her wonder. Across the room, Valerie was fussing over centerpieces. "The roses looked too pink," she said. "They were supposed to be blush." Emily, radiant in her gown, smiled tiredly. "Mom, they're perfect." "Perfection isn't negotiable," Valerie replied. I felt a pang of memory, our father insisting that curtains hang exactly 1 inch above the floor. Control disguised as taste. Emily caught my eye and smiled a small, silent apology. I smiled back. Later, as guests gathered for cocktail hour, I lingered by the hallway mirror. My reflection stared back, calm but unfamiliar. The chatter behind me swelled like ocean noise money talking to itself. I noticed the servers balancing trays of champagne, moving with mechanical grace. One brushed against me and whispered, "You work here sometimes," I said. He smiled faintly and kept walking. It struck me that in this family, service and silence looked the same. When the music started, I stepped outside for air. The garden glowed with fairy lights, delicate and false. A group of men near the bar were laughing about investment portfolios. I heard Valerie's voice again, sharp as crystal. "She's wearing polyester." Can you imagine someone murmured in response? At least she came. Valerie laughed. "That's the problem. She always does." I turned away before the heat could reach my face. The cool air steadied me. I remembered my mother's voice. "You don't need to match their noise, Diana. Just build something that outlasts it." Inside, the photographer called for one more round of family pictures. I waited until everyone had moved into position. Then I walked to the far corner of the room near a column. When the shutter clicked, the reflection in the mirror caught my silhouette, faint but visible, a ghost in plain sight. Later, I found that moment printed among the proofs, unintentional, undeniable. Proof that I had been there even when they tried to erase me. I returned to my table and sipped water while others toasted champagne. The planner passed by and said, "The lighting's perfect now. Whoever fixed it saved the day. Sometimes the simplest touch costs nothing," I said. She smiled. True. Most people overpay for the obvious. Her words stayed with me. I glanced again at Valerie, radiant under the lights I had adjusted, surrounded by people who mistook spending for sophistication. My chest ached not from jealousy, but from recognition. This was the performance I had financed. Yet standing there unseen but steady, I realized invisibility can be its own armor. You can't wound what you can't acknowledge. When the photographer announced the final group shot, Valerie hesitated, glancing my way, as if remembering an unfinished sentence. For a moment, I thought she might call me over. Instead, she turned back to the crowd. "Everyone who matters, please stay for one last photo." The words hung heavy, almost casual. I didn't move. The shutter clicked again, sealing my absence. I smiled to myself and whispered, "Let them have their picture." Outside, the night air was cooler. The street lamps hummed. I walked toward the shuttle area where the elderly guests were boarding, laughing, thanking the drivers I had arranged. One of them, a woman with a cane, grabbed my hand. "You planned this, didn't you?" she said. "You think so, I can tell. Only someone kind makes sure we have a ride." I squeezed her hand gently. Then maybe kindness is still contagious. As the bus pulled away, I stood under the glow of the chandeliers through the window and thought about the balance sheet of it all. 89,742 paid. Invoices cleared, photos cropped, justice deferred. Maybe tomorrow it would begin to collect interest. 3 months before the wedding, the air in Charleston was thick with summer humidity and tension that didn't belong to me, but somehow found its way into my inbox. Evelyn, the planner, had written in careful apologetic language, "Diana, I hope you don't mind me reaching out directly. There's been a complication with the venue deposit. Valerie mentioned you might advise." I remembered staring at the message, rereading that word, advise. It was the polite vocabulary of desperation. Attached was a scanned invoice from Magnolia Court stamped, "Pending cancellation. Deposit due $40,000. I leaned back in my chair, the soft hum of the ceiling fan filling the silence. The event was 3 months away, and the family had clearly overpromised again. I could have ignored it. I should have. But the thought of that young couple, Emily and her fiancé, humiliated by a venue pulling out days before their wedding, felt unbearable. Pride aside, this was still family, and failure would echo back to me whether I attended or not. So I called my banker the next morning. "I need to set up an escrow account," I said. "Purpose?" he asked. "Event vendor protection," I replied. It sounded sterile, but it was really insurance against deceit. We moved $40,000 into the account and created a conditional wire transfer to Magnolia Court. The bank generated a transaction summary, date, routing number, authorization code. I took a screenshot and saved it under a folder named Caldwell Retainer, Subuse. It looked like any other project expense. No one would ever trace it back unless I allowed it. I emailed Evelyn, "The funds will clear by Thursday. No attribution. Consider it handled." She replied almost instantly, "Anonymous donor." Something like that, I typed. "Condition, no mention, no receipts with my name." "Understood," she wrote. The next week, she texted me a photo of the signed venue confirmation with a single word, "Done." I stared at it for a while, feeling a strange calm. Escrow wasn't charity. It was control. Quiet, clean, and visible. It was how dignity looks when it learns to protect itself. A few weeks later, a new challenge arrived disguised as luxury. The floral supplier called Evelyn to report a premium peonies shortage, translation an excuse to raise prices. I happened to overhear the conversation while reviewing layout notes. "We'll need a 12% increase to secure imports," the supplier said smoothly. Evelyn sighed. 12% on 7,800, she murmured. "That's nearly 1,000 more. It's seasonal pressure," he insisted. "Clients at this tier expect the best." I took the phone gently from her. "This is Diana Mercer," I said. "You must be Mr. Latham." He hesitated. "Yes, ma'am. May I ask who you represent?" "The invoice?" I said simply. "You're charging 12% for flowers that haven't even shipped yet. Premium scarcity, ma'am. Peonies are like gold in June." "Gold depreciates if you mishandle it," I replied. He chuckled nervously. "What would you consider fair?" 8%, I said. "That covers logistics without rewarding panic. We'd lose margin." "You'll gain reputation," I countered, "and repeat business from someone who remembers integrity." There was silence, then a resigned sigh. 8% it is, Ms. Mercer. When the revised invoice arrived, the total read $7,980 saved. It wasn't about the money, it was about the principle. Some people buy respect, others negotiate it. Evelyn grinned when I showed her the numbers. "You could run this entire event yourself," she said. "Only if I wanted to go gray twice as fast." We laughed quietly. The laughter felt rare, unforced. As weeks passed, I handled each crisis with the same detached efficiency, never as family, always as a professional ghost, cleaning up their mistakes. It was liberating. No one asked, no one thanked, and that was the perfect balance. The silence became armor. Yet there were moments of softness, too, reminders that quiet revenge could still hold compassion. One afternoon, while reviewing menu options, I noticed a small note buried at the bottom of the catering list: guest dietary accommodations, severe nut allergy, guest of bride. It belonged to Claire, an old friend of Emily's who had once attended my holiday dinners. I remembered her kindness, the way she had helped me pack boxes the night I moved out after my divorce. Valerie predictably had dismissed the allergy note during planning. It's one person, she'd told the caterer. "We don't need to redesign the entire meal." That kind of indifference always disguised itself as efficiency. I emailed the caterer privately. "Upgrade the vegetarian course to a nut-free option. Charge it under miscellaneous. Use the higher-tier ingredients." He replied, "That'll add 200. "Approved," I wrote. "Make it elegant." It wasn't a grand gesture, but it mattered. A quiet correction to someone else's carelessness. That evening, I imagined Claire sitting at her table, safe, unaware of the quiet decision that protected her. Revenge doesn't always roar. Sometimes it simply refuses to mirror cruelty. The following week, the financial logistics were finalized. Every vendor was prepaid, every tip scheduled through escrow, every transaction traceable only to an anonymous corporate account. I had become both financier and phantom. Valerie called me once during that period out of formality more than interest. "You're still working on interiors, right?" she asked. "Yes, good for you. Persistence suits you." "So does selective gratitude," I replied. She laughed, missing the meaning entirely. I hung up feeling oddly peaceful. Silence is the most strategic reply to arrogance. It confuses those who expect noise. As August turned into September, the wedding machine accelerated. Evelyn checked in weekly with updates about linen schedules and minor crises. Each message ended the same way: all covered no attribution. I began to notice how the act of staying hidden became its own source of power. They were building a spectacle on a foundation I had poured, and yet none of them could see it. There was something exquisite about that symmetry: control without applause, grace without performance, justice measured in receipts. The night before the wedding, I reviewed the escrow closure forms one last time. The balance stood at zero. Every dollar accounted for every contract fulfilled. I closed my laptop and whispered, "Paid in full." In another life, I might have demanded acknowledgement. But acknowledgement was their language, not mine. Mine was precision. Mine was the satisfaction of knowing the empire they built for one night stood on the quiet competence they once dismissed. When the morning came, I dressed in my $30 suit, not as an act of defiance, but as a declaration of peace. Money moves loudly, dignity moves quietly, and sometimes silence earns the highest interest. Dinner began beneath the chandeliers, all crystal and arrogance. My name card was placed at the farthest table near the door that led to the catering corridor. From that vantage point, I could feel the draft each time someone carried plates in or out. My chair wobbled slightly, one leg shorter than the rest. Valerie's placement wasn't an accident. She had always believed that power was about distance. The farther she could place me, the smaller I would seem. Across the room, she sat under the floral arch, perfectly centered. Emily looked radiant beside her, though exhaustion showed at the corners of her smile. I slipped a folded napkin under the unsteady chair leg. It held for a moment before collapsing again. The woman beside me, elderly and elegant in navy silk, struggled with her seat as well. "These chairs have opinions," she whispered. "They like to make a scene." I smiled and pulled a coaster from the table, sliding it beneath her leg. "Try that." The chair steadied. She looked at me with surprise. "You're very resourceful." "Habit," I said. "I work in interiors. Stability matters." "More than people think," she replied softly. Her compliment warmed me more than the wine. Dinner service began. Silver domes lifted in unison, revealing plates so artful they seemed afraid to be eaten. Conversation buzzed, half gossip, half performance. I stayed quiet, watching the waitstaff navigate between tables, balancing trays heavy with champagne. One young server stumbled near ours, his hand shaking as a glass toppled. The liquid splashed across the tablecloth, catching candlelight like gilt. Valerie's voice cut through the air. "Careful," she said loud enough for others to hear. Then with a smirk she added, "She's used to picking things up." Laughter fluttered from her side of the room, polite and poisonous. My stomach tightened, but I forced my face still. I bent down, lifted the glass, and dabbed the spill with my napkin. "Accidents happen," I said evenly, turning to the waiter. "It's fine." His face flushed crimson. "I'm so sorry, ma'am." I reached for my wallet and slipped him a folded bill. "For the trouble," I whispered. He glanced down, realizing it was $50. "Ma'am, please," I said. "You're working hard." Gratitude replaced panic in his eyes. Around us, the laughter faltered, replaced by confusion. Valerie looked away first. The silence that followed was my small victory. Later, as dessert was served, I studied the name cards arranged around me. Mine sat beside a woman who had spent the first hour complaining about the temperature and the music volume alternating between sighs and glances at her phone. "You'd think for this kind of event they'd at least get the sound levels right," she muttered. I nodded. "Maybe you should sit closer to the speakers." She blinked, unsure if I was serious. "I suppose." A small idea sparked. When everyone rose for the toast, I quietly switched our name cards, placing hers beside the MC's podium, near the stage. When the guests returned, she found herself seated beside the loudest man in the room, a radio host who treated silence as a challenge. By the third question, about her career in real estate, she was blushing furiously, trapped in polite conversation. I sipped my water and allowed myself a private smile. Revenge didn't always need noise. Sometimes it just needed rearrangement. The dinner stretched on each course, more ornamental than the last. Around me, conversations turned toward business travel investment, all the usual currencies of status. No one noticed the quiet choreography of small acts happening at the margins. The napkin under the chair, the $50 kindness, the name card swapped like a chess move. Each gesture a line on an invisible balance sheet. At one point, Emily approached my table, her dress brushing the floor like a sigh. "Aunt Diana," she said softly. "Are you comfortable here perfectly?" I said. She hesitated. "I didn't realize they'd put you by the door." "I'm sorry, it's fine. The view's better from here." She smiled, half relief, half sorrow. "You always say that, because it's true." I touched her hand lightly. "You look beautiful." She squeezed my fingers. "Thank you for everything." Then she returned to her table. I watched her sit beside her mother, unaware of the quiet shield she carried, funded, organized, protected by the same woman sitting in the shadows. The irony was delicious. As the main course arrived, a murmur rippled through the crowd. The flowers on the head table had begun to wilt under the heat of the chandeliers. The planner rushed over, panicking. Valerie snapped, "I told you to use better hydration packs." Evelyn appeared calm as ever. "We did, Mrs. Callahan. The humidity is unpredictable." Valerie scoffed. "Excuses." I caught Evelyn's eye. She knew. She tilted her chin slightly toward me, a silent acknowledgement that the person who had saved the event wasn't sitting under the spotlight. I lifted my glass in a quiet toast to her from across the room. She smiled and mouthed, "To silence." The music softened as Emily's husband stood for his toast, a simple one, "Gratitude, laughter, family." His voice trembled with sincerity. Valerie dabbed at her eyes, theatrically drawing attention. I sat back and observed, detached but present. Every word about family and unity landed like irony, sharp and sweet. When the applause ended, I turned to the older woman beside me, the one whose chair I had fixed earlier. "What do you think of the evening?" I asked. She chuckled. "Expensive lesson in humility for some. You sit very still, but I think you see everything." "Old habits," I said. "Some of us build, others display." "And which are you both?" I replied. Her laughter was soft but knowing. By the time dessert plates were cleared, Valerie's table had grown louder, her wine glass refilled more often. She glanced toward me, once her eyes flickering with something curiosity, maybe unease. I held her gaze for a second, then looked away. The moment passed, but the shift was real. She could sense a balance tilting without knowing why. As the guests began to mingle, the woman seated near the stage, my name card's unintended victim stormed past, cheeks flushed. The MC wouldn't stop talking, she hissed to a friend. It was unbearable. I smiled into my glass, the taste of quiet satisfaction, lingering longer than any dessert. The night had been long, but every slight had found its echo, every insult its counterweight. They measured worth in visibility. I measured it in precision. I left before the speeches ended, slipping through the door beside my table. The hallway smelled faintly of roses and bleach. Outside, the night air was cool against my face. From the ballroom, laughter erupted again, hollow and bright. I walked toward the parking lot, calm and unseen, thinking sometimes the best seat in the house is the one near the exit. The toast began after dessert, a slow procession of compliments and anecdotes designed to flatter. Glasses clinked, lights dimmed slightly, and the sound of polite laughter filled the air. I sat near the back again, hands folded, half listening. Evelyn, the planner, stepped up to the microphone next. She was composed, her clipboard tucked neatly under one arm. "Before we close this evening," she began, "I'd like to extend gratitude to everyone who made this event possible. It takes more than beauty to create a night like this. It takes generosity." Valerie straightened in her chair, tilting her chin high. I could almost see the words forming behind her teeth. She loved nothing more than public acknowledgement. Evelyn continued, "Our floral team, the kitchen staff, the servers, you've all been wonderful. But tonight's success owes a special debt to our event sponsor." Valerie stood abruptly, laughing lightly, as if she were caught off guard. "Oh, Evelyn, please. No need for all that formality. We covered everything. Family tradition, you know." A few heads turned. The microphone picked up her voice with a sharp echo that filled the room. Evelyn froze for half a second, the kind of pause only professionals can disguise. "Actually," she said softly, "our gratitude goes to Ms. Diana Mercer and Mercer Interiors, LLC, for their $90,000 event support." The words fell like glass shattering. The music stuttered to silence. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Even the chandeliers seemed to hum differently. Valerie's expression froze in something between disbelief and panic. I didn't move. The light from the stage cut across the ballroom, landing directly on me. For a moment, I felt like prey caught in the open. Then the applause started, tentative, uncertain, then growing until it filled the space. Emily covered her mouth with both hands. Her eyes glistened as she rose from her seat and walked toward me. She didn't hesitate. She threw her arms around me, trembling. "You," she whispered. "It was you all along." I held her, not speaking. Phones lifted across the room, flashes popping like fireworks. Somewhere near the stage, Evelyn tapped her tablet. The projector behind her flickered to life. On the large white screen, a single image appeared, an invoice stamped, "Paid" in bold red letters, Mercer Interiors, LLC, clearly visible in the header. The guests gasped. Valerie's chair scraped against the marble as she stood. "Turn that off," she hissed. "This is inappropriate." Evelyn looked at her calmly. "Transparency is never inappropriate, Mrs. Callahan." Laughter, nervous but real, rippled through the room. Someone clapped again, louder this time. The applause became waves, punctuated by camera clicks. I turned to Emily, whose tears had left faint streaks across her cheeks. "It was for you," I said quietly. My voice didn't need the microphone. It carried on its own. Not for them. For you. She nodded, unable to speak. Valerie tried to recover. "We would have managed," she said, voice rising. "It was only a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding that cleared $89,742 a guest," muttered near the back. Laughter again, sharper this time. Valerie's face flushed. She glanced toward her husband, who looked suddenly fascinated by the floor. The atmosphere shifted. What had begun as a wedding dinner now felt like a tribunal. Emily's husband stepped forward, eyes searching mine. "I didn't know," he said softly. "I swear I didn't." "I believe you," I replied. He turned to his mother-in-law. "You let her pay for our wedding." Valerie's mouth opened, then closed. It was complicated. "No," I said, standing now. "It was simple. I was asked for advice. I gave it. I was asked for help. I provided it. The only complication was your need for credit." Gasps scattered through the crowd. No shouting, no raised tone, just truth stated plainly. That I had learned hurts most. Evelyn stepped forward again, smoothing the paper on her clipboard. "We appreciate Ms. Mercer's discretion. Without her contribution, this event would not have been possible. Every vendor, every employee, every flower in this room was paid fairly and on time. That's the kind of legacy we should be proud of." The applause returned, longer, warmer. Valerie sank back into her seat, eyes glassy with fury and humiliation. I glanced at her briefly. The expression she wore was the same one she had given me years ago when I signed my divorce papers, disbelief that control could ever shift away from her. Emily squeezed my hand. "You didn't tell anyone, would you have believed me if I had?" I asked. She shook her head slowly. "No, I suppose not." Then the timing was right. The guests began whispering again, small ripples of conversation, turning into low waves of gossip. I could hear words like family betrayal and karma floating in the air. Justice was having its quiet meal among them. Valerie stood again, her voice trembling now. "You've embarrassed me, Diana." I turned fully to her. "No, I reminded you." The silence that followed was perfect. A silence so pure it rang. Then Evelyn, ever the professional, closed her speech. To generosity, transparency, and truth, she said, lifting her glass. The crowd echoed her. To truth, glasses rose and clinked. Valerie didn't lift hers. Emily did. To truth, she said, "Eyes on me." I nodded, the corners of my mouth softening. The projector behind us still glowed, the paid stamp a red badge against the white screen. It looked strangely beautiful, like art created from precision instead of pride. Someone in the back called out, "You should frame that invoice." The laughter that followed was genuine, unforced cleansing. When the music resumed, people moved carefully, aware they were standing inside someone else's lesson. Valerie disappeared from sight. Emily stayed beside me. "I want to repay you," she said quietly. "You already did," I answered. "You believed me when it mattered. And what about her?" she asked. "She'll write her own receipt." I gathered my clutch and prepared to leave, but Evelyn caught my arm. "You could have told me to stay quiet," she said softly. "You didn't." "Because the truth always finds its way to a microphone," I replied. "I just made sure it had good lighting." As I walked toward the exit, I could feel the weight lifting, replaced by something lighter, steadier. Vindication without violence, power without cruelty. The murmurs behind me grew into conversation, then laughter again. I reached the doorway and looked back once. On the screen, the red word "paid" glowed under the chandeliers like a benediction. The event that had begun with laughter at my expense ended with a different kind of silence, one made not of shame but of realization. I smiled and whispered to no one in particular, "Quiet justice." The morning after the wedding, Charleston felt unusually quiet. The humidity had softened the streets, still glistening from a brief dawn shower. I sat by the window with my coffee, watching sunlight crawl over the rooftops, the air heavy with that peculiar stillness that comes after chaos. My phone vibrated once, twice, 3 times before I answered. Valerie's name glared across the screen. I let it ring a moment longer, then picked up. Her voice was sharp, breathless. "How could you humiliate me like that, Diana?" I waited, taking a slow sip. "You humiliated yourself," I said. "I simply paid the bill. You blindsided me," she spat, "in front of everyone." "Do you know how that looked?" "I do," I replied evenly. "It looked accurate." "You had no right to make me look like a liar. You did that when you claimed the credit," I said. "I didn't take anything from you, Valerie. You handed it over yourself." The silence that followed was brittle, like glass, cooling too fast. "You're cruel?" she whispered finally. "No," I said softly. "Just consistent." She hung up. I placed the phone down, letting the quiet stretch. Outside, a car horn sounded faint and distant. Then another call came through, this one from an unknown number. I ignored it. Messages began to appear, cousins, old family friends, people who had clapped and smiled the night before. Each text followed the same rhythm, didn't know the whole story, or sorry if things got awkward or you handled yourself so gracefully. Half apologies wrapped in self-preservation. None of them surprised me. People rarely apologize when silence will do. Around noon, Emily appeared at my door. She was still wearing traces of mascara from the night before, her hair tied up in a messy bun, eyes tired but clearer. "Can I come in?" she asked. "Of course." I poured her tea, the same blend my mother used to make when we were young. She sat quietly for a while before speaking. "I didn't know how deep it went," she said. "Mom always said you liked attention, that you were jealous." I smiled faintly. "It's easier to believe that than to see what's really happening." She nodded. "She's always measured people in money. Who earns it, who spends it, who gets to claim it. It's how she feels safe," I said. "Control is her currency, and you peace is mine." Emily looked down at her tea. "I thought last night would ruin the wedding," she said. "But people have been texting all morning. They said it was powerful. Truth usually is. Even Mom's friends," she added, half laughing. "One of them said you should be on a speaking tour. Let's not make that a habit," I said. She grinned for the first time that morning. "I wanted to thank you, not just for paying for everything, for teaching me something." "And what's that?" "That grace isn't free," she said quietly. "It costs restraint." I met her eyes. "That's a good lesson to start a marriage with." We sat in silence for a moment, the kind that feels full rather than empty. Before she left, I handed her an envelope. "One more thing," I said, "for you to post if you want." She looked puzzled. "What is it?" "A thank you sheet for the wedding staff. Names, roles, Venmo handles. Just something nice. You made this last night after I got home." "You're unbelievable," she said, smiling. "Post it without tagging anyone," I said. "No names, no brands. Just appreciation." She nodded. Quiet justice, exactly. That afternoon, Emily uploaded the post. "Weddings are built by invisible hands," it began. "Here are the people who made ours beautiful." Within hours, it spread shares, comments, messages. People praised the thoughtfulness, the humility. The servers and florists left thank yous in the comments, overwhelmed by recognition. No one mentioned me. They didn't have to. Every compliment that followed was its own echo. One user wrote, "This restores faith in kindness. Another added, "Whoever funded that deserves respect." Valerie's name never appeared. By evening, local blogs picked it up as a lesson in gratitude. I scrolled through the comments quietly, smiling at the irony. Valerie had spent her life chasing acknowledgement. I had learned to let it find me. Around sunset, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was Evelyn. "The post is everywhere," she said. "Vendors are calling me in tears. Good tears, I hope. The best kind," she said. "Someone asked if they could nominate you for a community award." "Please don't," I said. "I prefer invisibility." "You're very bad at staying invisible, Diana." "I'm getting better," I said. We laughed, and I could hear the relief in her voice. That night, I walked by the river. The air was cooler, carrying hints of salt and magnolia. Across the water, the city lights shimmered small and steady. My phone chimed again, another message, this one from a cousin who had ignored me for years. "Proud of you, Di. You showed real class." I typed a single reply. It wasn't a show. The truth rarely is. I stopped at a bench overlooking the bridge, watching the reflections ripple in the current. There was something peaceful about the aftermath, like the calm after a storm, when you can finally hear your own breathing again. I thought about Valerie, her voice brittle and breaking through the phone. Shame was a currency she had never learned to manage. It spent her instead of the other way around. I didn't hate her. Pity felt more appropriate, the kind that comes from distance. Back home, I turned off my phone and stood by the window looking at the empty street below. My reflection in the glass seemed steadier than it had in years. Maybe revenge isn't a single act, but a quiet series of corrections, the universe balancing its own ledger. Outside, a group of teenagers passed by, laughing their joy unfiltered. I smiled faintly. Somewhere behind me, the kettle clicked off and I whispered to the silence, paid in full. 2 weeks later, Charleston was quieter, as if the whole city had exhaled. My days fell back into rhythm meetings with clients, invoices sent, fabric samples laid neatly across my desk. The calm had weight to it. Not peace exactly, but the silence that comes after a storm has decided you were the wrong target. On a Wednesday afternoon, as I arranged swatches for a new project, a car pulled up outside. I recognized the sound before I saw it, the impatient double honk, the same rhythm Valerie used to summon attention at family gatherings. I didn't move. A moment later, the doorbell rang twice. I opened the door. She stood there overdressed for daylight, her lipstick smudged slightly at the corner, her posture brittle. "You have a minute?" she asked. "I suppose." I led her into the sitting room. She looked around as if assessing my furniture, her eyes pausing on the framed invoice that hung discreetly near my bookshelf. I had kept it there not as a trophy, but as a reminder that truth leaves paper trails. "You redecorated," she said. "Yes," I replied, "with my own money." She winced but sat down anyway. "I came because I need your help." That sentence feels familiar. She ignored the jab. "You've heard the rumors." I nodded slowly. "About you taking credit for work you didn't do." Her eyes flickered. "People are saying I faked sponsorships, that I manipulated invoices. I lost the Henderson contract, $120,000. They said they couldn't risk working with someone who fabricates contributions." She rubbed her temples. "And my credit card." "Well, there's been an issue. Apparently, my spending triggered a temporary hold. I need you to clarify things. Tell people it was a misunderstanding, that you insisted on anonymity and that's why it looked the way it did. You want me to fix your reputation. I want you to tell the truth." "I did," I said quietly, on a microphone, in front of everyone. "Diana, please." Her voice cracked on the second word. "You don't understand how bad this looks. My name, my career, everything I've built." I tilted my head. "Everything you built or everything you borrowed?" She stood suddenly pacing. "I'm not asking for charity. I just need you to issue a statement. Something neutral. Maybe that Mercer Interiors was part of the event planning that I coordinated through you. People would believe that. It wouldn't be true. It wouldn't be false," she shot back. "Semantics, Diana. You always loved those." I leaned back in my chair, watching her. How much she hesitated. What How much do you want me to lie for?" Her cheeks flushed. "That's not what I name a number," I interrupted. "There always is one." She exhaled sharply. 25,000, a temporary advance. I'll repay you once my accounts are cleared." I laughed, then not cruelly, but with disbelief. "You're asking me to fund your dignity, to protect my reputation. Reputation isn't a loan," I said quietly. "It's a ledger." She stopped pacing. The words hung between us like the slow swing of a pendulum. "What does that even mean? It means every choice has a balance column. You spent yours. You can't borrow against it." I rose and walked to my desk. From a drawer, I pulled out a folder, thick, neatly labeled. "If you're here for clarity," I said, "let's have some." I placed the folder on the table and opened it. Inside were printed screenshots, dated emails, receipts, and the wire transfer confirmation from my escrow account. On top, I set a printed message from Valerie's own email. We covered the entire cost ourselves. Beneath it, another message she'd sent Evelyn. "Let's keep my sister's name off all correspondence. She thrives on attention." Her face drained of color. "You kept those, of course. I work in documentation. It's a habit. You can't show them. I don't plan to. I don't need to. The truth has already done the work." She sat down again, weaker this time. "You're enjoying this?" "No," I said. "I'm just not rushing to clean it up for you." She pressed her palms together. "I'll do anything, Diana, please. Just tell people we work together. It's humiliating." "It's supposed to be?" I replied. "That's how correction feels." She stared at me for a long time. "You used to be kind. Still am. I'm just done being convenient." The silence that followed was heavier than anger. Then I spoke again, slower, measured. "Here's what you can do. Write a public letter thanking the wedding staff, the caterers, servers, planners for their professionalism. Apologize for any disrespect, and pay the $2,000 you still owe them in tips. You do that, and I'll make no further comments. You don't, and your silence will do the rest." She blinked. "You're serious?" "Always. And if I refuse, then you've already chosen your outcome." She swallowed her pride, breaking in small cracks. 2,000, she muttered. "That's nothing. It's everything I said. Because it's not about money. It's about acknowledgement." She stared at the folder again, the red headers, the signatures, the receipts. "You kept every piece," she said quietly. "You really are meticulous. Survival requires record keeping." "You sound like Dad," she whispered. "Then maybe you should have listened to him when he said I was the reliable one." She closed her eyes, exhaling slowly. "Fine, I'll send the tips, but I won't write any letter. Then we're done here." I gathered the folder and slid it back into the drawer. She looked up. "Do you ever get tired of being right?" "Only when it costs peace," I said. She rose to leave, but stopped at the door. "You know, people think you're cold." "I'm consistent," I corrected. "There's a difference." She hesitated. "You'll regret this. Families should stick together. Families should tell the truth." "You think you're so righteous." "No," I said. "Just accurate." When she left, the air in the house felt lighter. I walked to the window and watched her car pull away, the taillights vanishing into the Charleston dusk. On my desk, the framed invoice caught the last ray of sunlight. Paid, settled, closed. I poured myself a glass of water and whispered to the empty room, "Ledgers don't lie." Later that night, a notification pinged on my phone. A new post from the wedding planner's account, "Final payments cleared. Grateful for clients who value integrity. No tags, no names. Just the truth, polished and public." I smiled, setting the phone down. Justice didn't always roar. Sometimes it just balanced quietly, one receipt at a time. By March, life had found its rhythm again. My mornings began with the smell of coffee and the sound of seagulls outside my Charleston window, a quieter soundtrack than the chaos that had once filled my world. The invoices on my desk no longer represented survival but progress. 2 weeks after Valerie's visit, I signed the largest contract of my career, a full 12-month design partnership with the Savannah Bay Resort, valued at $250,000. The ink on the agreement gleamed under the desk lamp, steady proof that starting over could still lead somewhere meaningful. The resort's general manager, a woman named Clara Dunn, had called me personally. "We saw how you handled the Magnolia Court event," she said. "Professional, precise, unflappable. We need that kind of discipline here." I laughed softly. "Discipline is cheaper than luck," I told her. When the first payment cleared, I didn't celebrate with champagne or dinner. I drove to the fabric store on East Bay Street and bought 3 identical gray suits, each marked down to $30. As I folded them into their garment bags, I whispered to myself, "The $90 wardrobe." The phrase made me laugh, quiet and genuine. The clerk smiled politely, unaware she was witnessing a small revolution. Back at home, I hung the suits side by side in the closet. Uniformity had its comfort. Every time I looked at them, I remembered that dignity doesn't expire when style does. The following week, I began something I dreamed of during my loneliest nights after the divorce, a grant. I called it the Mercer Design Grant, $15,000 a year dedicated to women over 40 who wanted to return to creative work after long pauses, divorce caretaking layoffs, or simply life getting in the way. I set the first year's fund from my own savings. No committees, no publicity, no vanity logos, just a single-page application and a promise. If you've built others' worlds long enough, here's a start to rebuild your own. The first applicant was a retired art teacher from Beaufort who wanted to open a small upholstery studio. Her proposal was handwritten, careful the ink slightly smudged at the corners. Reading it, I felt something warm and steady. A piece of my own story mirrored back. When I sent her the acceptance email, her reply came within minutes. "I haven't been chosen for anything in years," she wrote. That line alone made the entire fund worth it. Late one evening while preparing mood boards for the Savannah project, my laptop buzzed with an incoming video call. It was Emily. I answered, smiling at her face framed by the soft chaos of newlywed life laundry behind her coffee mug in hand. Working late again, she teased. "Occupational hazard," I said. "And you trying to cook. It's not going well," she laughed. "The pasta is glue." "Add more water," I said automatically, then paused. "Actually, add more patience. It fixes most things." She tilted her head. "You sound like you're talking about more than pasta." "Maybe I am." Her smile faded slightly. "Mom's been quiet. I think she's embarrassed." "Good," I said gently. "Embarrassment is education in disguise. Do you think she'll ever change?" "Maybe not, but you can." She nodded slowly. "I've been thinking about what you said at the wedding, about peace being your currency. I want that. Then stop trying to earn love that costs your self-respect." She blinked, the kind of pause that happens when words land somewhere deep. "You sound like my therapist." "No," I said, smiling. "I just paid the tuition." She laughed, wiping a tear that wasn't quite from sadness. "You're building something new, aren't you?" "Always. A grant this time. For women who need a restart." "You're unbelievable," she said. "You could have just moved on quietly." "I did move on quietly," I replied. "But moving on doesn't mean disappearing." We talked for another half hour about her husband's promotion, about a stray cat that had adopted them, about little things that make ordinary days feel whole again. When we hung up, I sat there for a while staring at the reflection of my desk lamp on the laptop screen. For the first time in years, the reflection looking back didn't seem tired. It looked certain. The next morning, I drafted an email to my accountant to set up the grant's recurring structure, making sure it would continue even if I couldn't. Legacy doesn't need to be loud, only consistent. Later that week, as I organized samples for the Savannah Resort's lobby redesign, I found myself humming a habit I'd lost years ago. The melody wasn't even recognizable, but it felt like freedom disguised as noise. Around noon, I stepped out to grab lunch at a small cafe. The cashier looked at my outfit, plain gray suit, polished shoes, and said, "You look like someone who runs the place." I smiled. "I just make sure the bills get paid." He laughed without realizing the truth behind it. That evening I poured a glass of wine and stood by the window as the sun dipped behind the church spires. The air smelled faintly of salt and possibility. I thought about the grant applicants, the resort contract, the quiet mornings that no longer felt heavy. The rebuild wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. Before heading to bed, I glanced once more at the closet. 3 gray suits hung neatly identical yet defiant. I whispered to the darkness, "Backup dignity." The phrase made me laugh again. Sometimes the universe gives you luxury in the form of a second chance, sometimes in the price tag of $30. Both feel the same when you've earned them. Christmas Eve arrived with a softness Charleston rarely allowed. The air was cool but kind, the streets lined with string lights that glowed like patient fireflies. I had told myself I wouldn't attend the family dinner this year, that peace was better preserved in solitude, but something quieter had tugged at me. Not forgiveness exactly, but curiosity. Closure, maybe. When I pulled into Valerie's driveway, I noticed the difference immediately. The once ostentatious wreath of gold ribbons had been replaced with a simple green one, tied with twine. Modesty had made its way to her front door. Inside the house smelled of cinnamon and baked ham. The chatter was subdued, polite, cautious. Emily greeted me first, her face lighting up as if to anchor me. "You came?" she said, relief threaded through her smile. "For the food mostly," I replied, handing her a tin of cookies. She laughed, guiding me to the dining room where the long wooden table stood already set. 12 chairs, silverware lined perfectly, candles flickering. At the far end sat Valerie. For the first time, she didn't command the room. She looked smaller, her posture humble. When she saw me, she didn't rise or sneer. She just nodded once. I nodded back. The meal began with a quiet grace. Conversation stayed on safe topics, the weather, recipes, Emily's plans for the new year. No one dared mention weddings or debts or the word sponsor. I watched Valerie occasionally glance at me, then look away. The weight between us wasn't hostility anymore, just acknowledgement. Midway through dinner, a delivery driver appeared at the door with 2 large packages. Valerie stood to answer her heels, clicking softly on the tile. "Just the last-minute gifts," she said, signing the receipt. The driver thanked her and turned to leave, but she stopped him. "Wait," she said, reaching into her clutch. She pulled out an envelope and handed it over. "For you. Merry Christmas." He hesitated, then accepted it. "Ma'am, this is open it," she insisted gently. He did. A crisp stack of bills. $500, I guessed, peeked from the envelope. His eyes widened. "That's too much." "Not for someone who shows up when everyone else is home," she said quietly. The driver smiled, nodding with gratitude before stepping back into the night. The room had gone silent. Valerie returned to her seat without fanfare, without explanation. No one commented, but everyone saw it. It was her way of tipping the scale, of rewriting a small line in her own ledger. After dessert, Emily brought out coffee and the conversation loosened. The sound of laughter returned, tentative but real. When most of the plates were cleared, Valerie stood again, holding her mug. "Before we wrap up," she began, "I want to say something." The room quieted. "I haven't been proud of how I acted this year," she said. "I let pride run my mouth and fear write my decisions. It cost me more than money." Her eyes flicked toward me, steady but soft. "Diana, I learned something from you, that sometimes silence doesn't mean surrender. It means strength." I didn't speak. She took a breath. "The suit," she said finally. "It looked right on you." The table stayed still for a moment. The fireplace crackled behind us. I looked at her, this woman who had spent years measuring worth in numbers and applause, and I saw the first hint of sincerity that wasn't currency. I smiled. "It fits just fine." Her lips curved into something fragile, but real. The kind of smile that doesn't erase the past, but acknowledges the present. Emily exhaled softly, tension dissolving around the table. Someone raised a glass. To family, a cousin offered. To learning, I added, and to second chances Valerie finished. The glasses clinked, gentle and deliberate. For the first time in a long while, the sound felt honest. Later, as coats were fetched and goodbyes exchanged, Valerie approached me by the door. She handed me a small envelope. "No money," she said quickly. "Just something I thought you should have." Inside was a faded photo our family store in its early days, my mother standing in front, smiling under the sign that read, "Mercer Home and Design." "She would have been proud of you," Valerie said. "Of both of us, maybe." Maybe I said, "Merry Christmas, Valerie. Merry Christmas, Diana." Outside, the cold air carried the scent of pine and salt from the nearby marshes. I walked slowly to my car, the photo still warm in my hand. The city was quiet, the kind of quiet that only comes when everything unnecessary has fallen away. When I got home, I hung my coat, lit a candle, and sat by the window. The reflection in the glass showed a woman no longer shadowed by bitterness, but shaped by boundaries. I thought about the driver's surprised face, the envelope, the small dignity of that moment. Redemption doesn't always arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it shows up with an awkward pause and a $500 tip. On the table beside me, my phone buzzed with a new message. It was from Emily. "Thank you for coming tonight." It felt different. Maybe better. I typed back, "Better is a start." Before bed, I opened the closet. The 3 gray suits hung there, pressed and ready. I ran my hand over the fabric and smiled. "Still fits," I whispered. In the mirror, the woman looking back wasn't the same one who had walked into that wedding months ago. She was quieter, but stronger. The kind of quiet that can't be mistaken for weakness anymore. Outside, a soft drizzle began to fall, turning the streetlights into halos. I blew out the candle and let the darkness settle warm and full. Some endings don't need words, only presence. The late afternoon light drifted over the Ashley River like liquid gold, the kind that makes even silence feel sacred. The tide moved slow and deliberate, small ripples folding into one another, carrying reflections of bridges and old oak trees, heavy with moss. I walked along the path that wound near the water hands in my pockets, breathing in the soft salt air. Charleston had always been a city of tides of comings and goings, of losses that made room for returns. Today it felt like it had exhaled with me. The river carried pieces of my story downstream, washing away the noise that used to fill every corner of my life. Respect, I thought, isn't bought, but sometimes the bill has to be paid. For me, that bill had come in the form of $90,000, one worn-out suit, and the courage to stay silent when words would have cheapened the truth. I paused at a bench near the pier and let the sun rest on my face. The same warmth that had once felt like pressure now felt like peace. Behind me, the city hummed with its ordinary lifeboats moving in the distance bells, from St. Michael's faint in the wind, laughter from a nearby cafe. Everything had continued as if nothing monumental had happened, and maybe that was the point. The world rarely marks our quiet victories, but we know when they arrive. I thought about Valerie's envelope to the delivery driver, her careful apology over dinner, her measured silence afterward. Redemption isn't a single act, but sometimes it begins with the smallest one. I thought about Emily, her call the next morning, her words trembling with hope. "Mom said she's proud of you," she had told me, in her way. I smiled at that memory now. Maybe forgiveness wasn't meant to be neat or symmetrical. Maybe it was simply the decision to stop counting what was owed. When I returned home, the light through the window cast a soft glow across my office. Mercer Interiors felt different these days. The space had been repainted in pale sage, the furniture rearranged for light instead of hierarchy. The air smelled faintly of cedar and fresh paper. On the far wall hung 2 frames, side by side. One held the invoice from the Magnolia Court wedding, the words, "Paid" in deep red across its center. The other held the small price tag from my $30 suit encased in glass. Together, they told the story better than any speech could. Debt and dignity side by side, balancing each other perfectly. I reached out, straightening the frame slightly. "Still fits," I whispered. A quiet hum filled the room, the air conditioning kicking on the faint creak of wood settling. The world has a way of reminding you that peace is alive, not static. It moves, breathes, requires tending. On my desk, a stack of new client proposals waited, among them another message from the Savannah Resort expanding their contract. Stability had replaced survival, and I treated it with the respect it deserved. No celebration, no indulgence, just gratitude. I turned on the desk lamp and glanced toward the closet. 3 gray suits hung there, pressed and ready uniform soldiers of composure. They had become part of my ritual. Some women wear armor. Mine just happened to come off a clearance rack. As the light faded outside, a knock came at the door. Then the familiar chime of the bell above it, 2 clear notes that echoed softly through the office. I looked up to see a woman standing in the doorway, maybe in her late 40s, her hands clutching a small folder. "Are you Ms. Mercer?" she asked. "I am. I'm here about the Mercer Design Grant." Her voice shook slightly. I almost didn't apply. I thought I was too old to start over. I smiled. There's no such thing as too late. "Come in." She stepped inside, and I gestured toward the chair across from my desk. Her shoulders eased as she sat, the tension giving way to something like relief. I remembered that feeling, the moment when someone stops seeing themselves as broken and starts seeing possibility again. "Tell me about your project," I said. As she spoke, I listened carefully, taking notes, but mostly just letting her story fill the room. Every detail reminded me why I had started the grant, why giving women another chance wasn't charity but restoration. When she finished, she looked at me expectantly. "You've already begun," I told her. "You just needed someone to confirm it." Her eyes softened. "Thank you." "Don't thank me," I said. "Just build something beautiful." She nodded, and as she left, I heard the door chime again, the same sound it had made the day I reopened the office after the divorce, the same sound it had made after the wedding. It was the sound of continuation. I stood for a moment, letting the quiet settle once more, then turned toward the window. The last rays of the sun brushed across the frames on the wall, catching the red word, "paid," and making it gleam. Outside, the river kept moving, indifferent, yet constant. I knew now that closure wasn't about finality, but understanding. You don't erase the past, you integrate it. You make peace with the receipt, not by tearing it up, but by learning from what it cost. As I turned off the lamp, I whispered to the empty room, "Some debts aren't paid in money. They're paid in growth." Then I stepped outside, locking the door behind me. The evening air was cool, the kind that carried the promise of something earned. I walked toward the street as the city lights flickered on, one by one. The river whispered in the distance, a steady rhythm, reminding me that life goes on quietly, justly. If this reminded you of a toxic family moment, tell me how you chose quiet justice. Your story of silent revenge may help someone find emotional resilience and truth and closure. This channel is about dignity over money, standing up for yourself, and reclaiming respect. Real justice without hate, real revenge through truth.